Hello, welcome to the Mistika webinar session. As Eva was mentioning before, we are going to have an introduction to the color grade node. We're going to start by having a look at how to set up Mistika Timeline to do a color grade. We will layer the timeline, set up a stack to do the grade, and learn how the flow of that stack works. Next, we will delve in the color grade node, and we will see what we could do with primaries, with printer lights, with the bands, the fixed vectors, curves, RGB, and HSL. And most importantly, what we're going to see, what I want you to learn, what I want you to get out of today's webinar is how the vector hierarchy, the color grade node works inside, how the order of operations is done inside Mistika color grade node, and how you can use it to your advantage, and how you can bypass or override how the vector hierarchy works. Okay, so well, let's just crack on. So what I've done here is I've prepared a timeline already with some red media, and also another section where I have some ARRI Alexa footage as well. And what I want to show you is basically what I've built here in this stack that we see here in all the other shots. I've already built what I'm going to build for you now. So I've got my red clip that if I select and I go to the attributes of the clip, I can see all the attributes of the clip in the comment section. Okay. But for the purpose of this webinar and to actually work with the red parameters, what I'm going to do is apply the R3D parameters effect. And by applying the R3D parameters effect, I'll be able to change the settings of how this is debayed in Mistika. And I'm going to choose to work with log3G10. So we use IPP2 from red. And the color space is going to be red, white, gamut, RGB. Okay. So I'm doing this by applying the R3D parameters just on top of the source clip. Next thing I will do is change the resolution, the size of my footage to the project resolution, and I'm going to do that with a framing effect. And with that framing effect, basically what I'm going to do is set the result size to the project resolution. I'm working in a HD resolution for the purposes of this webinar. But obviously, when you work on your end, you could obviously choose to work in another resolution. And over here, what I've done on all the other shots is crop to fit rather than pad to fit. So I could see all the pixels in the shot in my visual editor. And you could see now, we could see here in the timeline, as soon as I scroll through the timeline, that all the shots are set up in exactly the same way. On the other section, we are going to have just a frame effect on top of some ARRI Alexa clips. So now I've prepared already this small edit where I've got my clip, my R3D parameters, and my framing effect where I'm adjusting the size of the media to my project resolution. And what I'm going to do is actually select all the framing nodes and apply here my color grade node. Okay, and that's when we are going to start to do our color grade. When I apply the color grade node, when I click the color grade effect, obviously it will adapt to the size of the clips, the duration of the clips. And then just to access the color grade node, I just have to double click on the node and we enter the visual editor just as we've done with the previous nodes. I'm going to open a scope here. I'm going to have a vector scope. And over here, I'll have RGB overlap waveform. Okay, so first thing that we see when we work in the color grade node is when we enter the color grade node is vector number 1, and you could see here that the primary is highlighted. Okay, and as the primary is highlighted, obviously what we could do is start doing some work on our shot. So for example, what I'm going to do is set the black point and start maybe setting the white point here. Okay, we could see that there is a slight red dominant in the highlights, and maybe I could raise a little bit blue, purple there in the shadows. Okay, and even for maybe this operation, what I could do is look for some help with one of my the color pickers in Mistika, and maybe choose a point. You could add the color picker information just by pressing Shift and with the right button of the mouse, sorry, Control and the right button of the mouse, click on a point of the image. Okay, here actually what I'm doing is I'm dragging along the picture, and you can see how the values, and we have crosshair information in the waveform showing exactly the levels of the RGB channels in the waveform. And what we could see is that right now the blue channel is slightly more higher than the rest, and basically what I could do is adjust that with a white point. So I could do a white balance, or one thing that I can do, I'm going to show only positive values here, is we could see here we have to our right of our primaries, we have the printer lights options in Mistika. These are basically manipulators of what white point and black point can do. Manipulators of the black point and white point controllers. One thing I forgot to say is obviously black point, gamma, and white point are the lift, gamma, and gain operators inside Mistika, and lift, gamma, gain, as you might find them in other solutions. So with the printer lights, what you could do in Mistika is actually you could choose where you're going to apply this change. Like for example, here I can choose to do this change in the white point and do full steps, full step, half step, and a quarter of a step. Okay, and we could see just in the waveform that the blue, just in that point that we clicked on. Okay, remember it's with Control hold down, right button over the image. We could see that the blue channel is slightly higher. So what I could do is say, okay, let's just lower it a step down. And maybe we've gone a bit too far there. I've gone two times. And I could see as well that green is slightly higher. And maybe for that, I'm going to do half a step on the green. And this is changing actually the white point. Well, that was a bit too much with the green, so I'm going to do a quarter of a step and bring it up. And there you could see that now my three crosshairs meet at the same point, and we have a single white crosshair indicating that we've balanced the shot completely in that point of the image. Okay, so I'm going to, for just 1 second, so we could see a little bit more of our image, get rid of the storyboard there, so we could see this slightly better. So now I won't need the visual information or the added information of the RGB values here. So I'm going to get rid of it just by clicking on an empty part of the visual editor, and I can get rid of those values. So I've added, so we've added some contrast into the image. We've balanced the white point. Maybe I could raise a little bit the gamma. The next things that we could do, obviously, what we have in vector number 1 is we have the options of bands, which is an HSL selection tool. Difference between a bands and the primary is that if we adjust the contrast in the primary, like we've done here, like I've just done now, I'm also affecting the saturation of my image. But when I adjust the contrast here, as you can see that my saturation in the vector scope is actually not being affected, okay? So that's why you can see that our bands are HSL and are behaving with the luminance ring not affecting the saturation of the image. One thing that we need to take into account is that we have the option of adding saturation in the primary, and that is one of the values that are ASC CDL compliant. Okay, so you could actually use the primary grade in Mistika to export CCC CDL information, or even export an EDL with CDL information. And one of those values is obviously the saturation. But there's other parts of the node where we can apply saturation. And it's, for example, here in the bands. I just want to show you how different they react, okay, and explain to you why. So I'm going to add here 200, twice the saturation that we have in the image, and just see the result and see how everything looks here. I'm going to reset this and go back to my primaries and actually do the same, 200, and see that the result is slightly different. Why? Well, first reason is that the post sat here, it's actually, you could see that the prefix of post saturation here, it means that it's doing this operation right after all the corrections that we've done in black point, gamma, and white point, okay? But in the bands, it's actually doing this in parallel, okay? It's not applying the saturation after the corrections that we've done in the primary. It's applying it at the same time, and that's why you would have a different result. If you would want to do that with bands and get the same result, it would be as going to adding another layer and adding here in saturation 200. Okay, so we double the saturation and we get the same result as we did with post saturation, because now it is applying the saturation right after the saturation correction, right after the primary correction that we've just done. Okay. Similarly as well, this means that if I apply a color grade node, okay, just maybe I've gone too fast there. I've just got rid of vector number 1. Okay, so let's go back. So in the same way as what we've done with vector number 2, it would happen the same with another color grade node. So if I apply a second color grade node and do the same thing, even if it's with post saturation here, and if I reset it, or with bands, I get the same result, because all this saturation operation is done right after the primary correction that we've done in vector number 1 of our previous grade. So this is important to know, because it's the only thing in the Mistika vector structure that goes after the corrections that we've done in, for example, in the primary, okay? And all the other ones, bands, fixed vectors, curves, all work in parallel, okay? So maybe you would want to organize your timeline where you would have your base grade as a single color grade node just on top of the source image, and then apply a color grade node to do all your creative work, okay? So that really depends on how you want to work. Or normally, as I normally do, I tend to do everything inside the same color grade node, okay? So I get rid of the one on top, and then maybe if I have to do some adjustments on top on another node, that's when I would apply a second color grade node, okay? So let's see a little bit more on how this hierarchy works. So we've seen that vectors really behave like a new node, okay? So I can apply another node. The other reason why I'd rather work with a single node or inside one node is because I can bypass this vector hierarchy, as we're going to see later on. So if I start doing my grade here in bands, for example, and let's actually go back to vector number 1 and maybe apply some saturation, okay, maybe even compensate a little bit to red there, just compensated that in the gamma. So go back to vector number 2, and in bands here I start doing maybe a little bit of a Ness curve, or I start doing a little bit of my creative grade. The bands is a luminance discrimination of the signal. So you can see here that I've got black point, shadows, midtones, highlights, and a white point. But where does that luminance discrimination come from? It will come from, obviously, the signal that we're working on, but more specifically, you can modify the source of that luminance discrimination inside the keyer just by changing the key source. And right now, as you can see here, it says base. Base refers to the first vector of our color grade. Okay, so actually, just to make it easier for everyone here, I'm going to change the name of vector number 1 to base, so you could see there is a relationship in vector number 2 with the key source here. So that is important to know, because here in the base, what I've done is I've set the my black point and my white point basically from 0 to 100 of my waveform here, or in this case it's showing a 10-bit value scale from 0 to 10, well, it's an 8-bit value to 2056. If I can change that here from 0 to 1024. So I've set the black point and white point to those values, okay? But, and we're going to do this by inserting a layer between vector number 2 and vector number 1. So just by clicking insert layer. And now vector number 3 is the one that originally was vector number 2. What I want to show you here now is actually in this primary, I'm going to exaggerate what we've done here in the primary. Okay, I'm actually going to bring that down. I'm going to show here just positive values, zoom out a bit, because the other thing I can do here is in options, clamp this. Okay, so you can see there I can actually clamp that information in vector number 2. Okay, what I want to show you here is that I'm obviously applying a grade here. Okay, what I want to show you is how, when we change the keyer, the key source, what I'm doing in the bands is going to change. Okay, and in this case, what I'm going to do is if I change this to source, I'll be using the luminance information that I have here in my source. Okay, so this is why maybe with depending on the job that we're doing, in this case we are working in a display referred mode where I'm viewing the result in my sRGB monitor, and that is the result that I'm going to be happy with. But maybe you would want to apply a lot just before, so it's normalized before you start doing any creative work, and you have that as also the source of your key. But we can change that, obviously, here in the key source and say, okay, let's do vector number 2. And as soon as I go to vector number 2, see how now I have a lot of information there that is going out. That is because the vector number 2 information that we're working with, okay, is actually the clipped information that we have here, okay? In this case, I'm not interested in doing this operation as I'm doing here, so I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, but really just wanted to show you how you can affect the way the bands behave by changing what the key source is. In this case, let's get rid of vector number 2 and continue our creative work as we intended. Let me go back here. And here in bands, I'm going to also reset the key here to base. And we're going to be working on the luminance information that we have on our first vector. How can we change how those bands behave? Like, for example, there maybe our white shirts are a bit too hot. Maybe I would want to bring some detail from the midtones down. Okay, maybe actually I've been maybe too aggressive in the shadows. You could go to ranges here. And in the ranges, first thing that you could do is that with the left button, just by clicking the left button, you can drag the leftmost point, which would be the black point, and the rightmost point, which would be the white point, okay? And where this black curve meets the gray curve is where the shadows where the shadows are going to be defined. And over here, this section where we have the gray curve meeting on one end the black curve, and on the other one the white curve would be our midtones. So one thing that we can do here with the right button of the mouse and getting hold of the orange handle there is actually modify how much of the highlights will start to be considered midtones, okay? And you could see how the operation where we brought down some of the midtone information there is now also being applied to information that we that originally was considered highlights, okay? So there you could really play with how those ranges are done, okay? So if you really want to reset this and go back to square one, you just can reset that on that button. But in this case, I really want to apply that here and maybe even bring in a little bit my white point here, and in bands just bring my white point closer to my highest legal point, and let's maybe saturate a little bit the midtones there, okay? All the controls at the bottom also will be modified by the ranges, and you can see you have hue, saturation, and contrast controls here. Okay, so next thing that I'm going to show you is how this is affecting the fixed vectors. Fixed vectors is also another tool that is really dependent on the incoming image. Like, for example, I'm going to go to the beginning of the shot, and here in the beginning of the shot, we could see we have that red plant, and I'm going to take that red plant to yellow. Okay, so I'm just going to drag my red information by taking back to, well, taking it up to yellow greenish feel, okay? And then I'm going to go to my curves here. And obviously here in curves, I have my RGB curves, luminance versus luminance, saturation versus saturation, luminance versus saturation, and hue, saturation, and hue, luma. Let's use hue, and add some points here. Some people maybe would expect that if I really want to maybe bring this back down to red, I could just maybe choose the yellow part of the curve and bring it down to red. But you could see there that I'm not affecting what was the red plant there. That is because fixed factors and curves are being being affected by the incoming information, and they work in parallel. That means that if I really want to change that red plant, even after I've done something in the fixed factors, I have to choose my red point here, and you can see there now that I'm increasing that green shift that I've done on the fixed factors on my curves, okay? So this is really to really kind of set the foundations of how the Mistika color tool works. And as you gain more experience with the tool, you could actually know what tools and what operators do you need to apply and in what order to achieve the creative goal that you want, okay? In this case, obviously, we don't want this to look green. So I'm going to get rid of what we've done here. But for the purpose of what we are doing here, I'm just going to add another layer and show you how now, if I choose here, now we are in a new vector. Now, if I choose my yellow point here, it will affect now all the yellow information, which is quite a lot. And it is including what originally was the red plant, and we took to yellow, and now it is affecting that part of our image, okay? So this is really important to understand how the order of operations works and how the vectors work in Mistika, and how every element inside the vector will work in parallel. And if you want to change something, you will if you want to do something after one of the operators, the best thing would be to add another vector. So I'm going to reset the previous one. Well, setting them up there. And normally, I really like to use in conjunction, maybe in one same vector, bands and fixed vectors. Normally, because bands, I could really play a lot with the luminance, and also with the fixed factors, I could start playing with the HSL values of my 3 primary colors and 3 secondary colors of red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. Okay, so you can see here that in this section we have hue and saturation, and maybe here I could saturate a little bit the yellow information. I'm actually going to take this to red, and also we could maybe start saturating a little bit the sky there. Okay. So we have an idea now of, oh, and one thing just before we go to the next thing, the operation changes that we've done here in the fixed factors, okay, and I'm gonna do this again, okay, so we could see it, won't be affected by the key source. It would always be affected by the incoming image, okay? So it will work off the correction that we've done on the previous vector, okay? This is important to understand. So we know that we are not affecting by changing the key source the fixed vectors, okay? In this case, let's leave this back to base. and reset this. So fixed vectors are always going to work off the information that was fed by the previous vector, and bands is going to do luminance discrimination depending on the key source that we have defined. So this really means that you could actually start bypassing that rules just by changing the key source. And now in a second, we are going to see how we can bypass all the options over here in another shot, but how we can bypass the vector hierarchy. So over here, I have another shot, and I'm going to apply a color grade effect on top of this. And let's enter into the clip, and we're going to start, well, let's do a quick primary correction. We could see there is a quite heavy yellow dominant. So I'm going to take this slightly to blue, try to compensate. I'm going to bring the gamma up just a tiny bit. Also, there's a little bit, see that black black clothes there really helps us to set the black point in the shot. Okay, and let's add another layer, and in this other layer, add a little bit of, let's raise a little bit our midtones, but add a little bit of shadow contrast there. Okay, we could also do it from here. And add a little bit of global saturation into our shot. Okay, so you can see I've added just two vectors for now. I've worked a little bit on the primary. I've worked it on bands a little bit on my second vector. And what I'm going to do now is apply another vector. And in this vector, I'm going to start working with my options tab here. And in this options tab, basically the goal of what we are going to do here is actually work and try to see if we can add a little bit of a glow into those nice specular lights that we have there in the background. What we're going to try to do is add a little bit of glow. You could do it on a single vector. You don't need to do multiple vectors. But so, for example, one way could be just by making a selection of the highlights. Okay. Adding a little bit of a key blur. Let's move highlight there, and maybe just change the overlay mode to screen. We could see we have a little bit of a glow there on the background highlights there. But we're going to do something a bit more aggressive and see how we could play with the vector hierarchy here. Okay, actually, so I'm going to reset this vector, but just by pressing delete, or you could do it here in the edit tab just by pressing remove selected. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to defocus this shot. I'm going to defocus, let's leave it at 30 points there. And here now, I'm going to add another layer. And in this layer, what I'm going to ask Mistika to do is actually recover the color information I had in vector number 2. Okay, so I'm bypassing what I've done in vector number 3. What I could do as well is I'm going to add now another layer. And in this case, I am going to recover vector number 3. But now I'm going to maybe for the purpose of this, let's show something first, soft light. Okay, so we could see there the difference quite quickly. Okay, and see how that soft light has been applied, or even add a overlay effect there that is a bit more aggressive, so we could see the result. And actually, you could even modify a little bit how that overlay looks just by adding a little bit of color there in the gamma. Going to reset that there so you could see it. So there we get maybe a little bit of that dreamy effect. But, well, what we wanted to do was actually do a little bit of that glow. I'm going to focus on those highlights, which maybe we already have, but let's just focus on doing it on the highlights here. What I could do is, first of all, actually what I want to do is go to the keyer, and in the keyer, just select the highlights as we did before. These highlights, something like that. I'm gonna bring the key softness down so it is a bit more aggressive, and obviously add a little bit of a key blur. Okay, and there we already have a little bit of glow, but I'm going to change the overlay mode to screen. Okay, so it's even more aggressive there. Okay, and here now you can see the change. And all this has been done by bypassing the order of how the vectors are working. And all that is something that we could do with the recover mode. And actually, in this case, it's inside. If we had a key, we could actually define another way of recovering in the outside. And obviously, we also can define the strength of how that is blending. Sorry, I had this muted. Of how this is blending just by modifying the layer blend here. Okay, so that is one way that you could creatively change the hierarchy of the vectors. And you could see here as well that we have the RGB channels activated. We could choose to say, actually, I do not want to modify this on my on all my 3 channels. I just want to modify this on green and blue, okay? And we get kind of that cyany feel, or maybe just blue, and we get a little bit of a blue magenta tint there. Or maybe it would make more sense if I just want to apply this in the Luma, okay? And then maybe just play again with my key softness and define how aggressive that glow is going to be. And similarly, the same thing with the blur of my vector, okay? So these are the different options that we have. You also have you can choose different type of blurs of how the image is going to be blurred, but this is obviously what we've done in vector number 3. So here, if I choose circle blur, we will get a different result on how that was blurred. And also the focus gamma would also affect the colors, the resulting colors there. So that is a way of how we could do a grade in Mistika and add a little bit of an effect with our color grade. I'm going to actually bring down midtone so we could see a little bit more the detail in the glow there. And actually maybe just here be a little bit more aggressive with a layer blend. So going to jump into some questions. Hope you enjoyed this, and please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to try to solve any doubts you have. So the first question that we're going to answer, it's going to be Jeff Sosa's question. It's going to be, if you're using the unicolor, is it better to grade in a color node beneath the unicolor or on top? That's a great question. And well, so for example, maybe what you could do, it depends on what you're using the unicolor for. And that is something that I have prepared over here. And actually, I'm going to get rid of the color grade node. So over here, I just got two shots of that we've been working on earlier. We got this shot that we're working on log 3G10, and in this color space, red, white, gamut, RGB. Okay. You could use a unicolor, obviously, to match the cameras. And in this case, this other shot that we were working on was log C shot in ARRI with log C and Alexa white gamut. Okay. And what I'm doing is changing that to red, white, gamut, RGB, and the output curve to red log 3G10. Okay. So that is one way of using the unicolor. And in this case, I would obviously do the color grade on top of this. But what if you are using the unicolor as the transformation that is going to help you to deliver to PQ monitor, for example? So maybe what you would want is actually apply the unicolor on top of this and say, I'm actually doing the color grade. What did we do this transformation to? It was to red log 3G10, right? Input gamut, RGB white gamut. And we're going to convert the gamut to, obviously, let's say, DCI-P3 D65, and output curve PQ SMPTE 2084. Okay, so we would be doing the grade just under the unicolor, because the unicolor will be helping us to do our kind of setting to the standard that we want. Okay, so that would be definitely a way of using the unicolor after the color grade. So it really depends on how you are going to use the unicolor. There's another thing I want to tell about the unicolor, and it actually is related to the color grade node, and it's the soft clip option inside the color grade node. So I'm going to clone this shot here, the red clip that we have been working on throughout the day. And over here, I'm going to apply a unicolor effect, where I'm going to be going from red log 3G10 to an input gamut of red, white, gamut, RGB. And I'm going to change the gamut. And in this case, I'm going to go to sRGB D65 and output curve to obviously my Gamma 2.2 GUI monitor. And you could see there how I've got a lot of values there that are way out of my 1024 legal area. Okay, that is because the unicolor does not do a tone mapping, and you could actually do the tone mapping with a color grade tool. So I could go and apply a color grade effect, and you would have here the option of using obviously your black point and white point to set maybe where those values are. But then with a soft clip here, define what values you want to bring inside the legal range. You're basically doing the tone mapping of the image there yourself. And actually you can define where that pivot starts and how aggressive the roll-off is going to be. Okay, so that would be way of working with a unicolor. On top of it, the unicolor is doing a conversion to your display referred to your display reference monitor, and then you use the vector number 1 or the primary color corrector tool to do the soft clip. Okay, hope that answered your question, Jeff. We're gonna go. Okay, so next question will be John Salvia. Could you go into more depth on the uses of bands? Reminds me a bit of SpeedGrade's 12-way color corrector. Okay, not very familiar with SpeedGrade's 12-way color corrector, but the uses of bands. It's a really interesting question, because let's go to one of the graded shots that we already have. It will be much easier. So one thing that we can do with the bands, let me see, I'm going to try to find a quite specific shot for this. Give me a second, guys. I'm going to think this through. So let's say that I'm going to add another vector. And actually here, well, let's kind of maybe lift this up a bit. There, okay. One thing that the bands tool could do is actually give you another layer of control inside a key, for example. So let's say that over here, what we're going to do is going to do a key selection, try to get maybe a lot of skin tones. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Although I really like to narrow down the selection and the softness handles on each end. Made them as obviously as wide as possible. And obviously let's add a little bit of a blur. Okay, but basically to kind of understand what I want to explain might be enough. Okay, so once I go back here into the image, now I can do my correction with bands in here. And I would have the option of actually saying, okay, yeah, let's just raise a little bit of detail there in the midtones of the hands, maybe bring down a little bit the shadows, and then it will give you another level of control here, because here with the ranges, then you would say, actually, I really want to take a little bit of what I've done in the shadows. I want to actually take it to the midtones, or the other way around. I really want to affect what was meant to be shadows in the hands to be considered midtones. So I can bring that up. And in this case, also add a little bit of saturation there. So I could say, okay, I'm happy with that then. So it will give me another level of control out of the keyer of how the luminance ranges works in the selection I've just done inside the keyer. So I hope that really helps, John, to answer your question. Okay, awesome. Yes, I'm reading Jeff Grossfeld. Yes, the Bring panel. Actually, that was a question that we had this morning. Yeah, that is really, really interesting. Actually, we could actually do a webinar, a 1-hour webinar, just only on the Bring panel. So Andres, Dan Andreev, is it possible to convert HDR grade to SDR using unicolor? Nice, tricky question. So what you could do is you could do a standards conversion of HDR grade to an SDR grade. It will basically fit your HDR grade into the SDR standard. But then it would be up to you to actually do the tone mapping to fit all those values that would be out of the legal SDR levels, bring them inside the legal range. So Andres Munoz, how about adding a moving background to the bottles as if it would be a reflection? Okay, a moving background. So just adding like an effect of something moving there. You can do that directly from the color grade node. Yeah, let's go back 1 second. Oh, yes, you can do that. Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, he's added another comment, which was, I mean, using the matte as a whole for other layer. Yes, let's do that. So basically, so we have it here. Okay, so I can highlight there in the highlight, I could see what I'm keying. And if we go to the keyer and go to output here, you could select the option export key. Okay, and the export key option, if I show now here show key effect, which is now I can't find it, which is actually show alpha here, not show key, show alpha. We could see that you're exporting the color grade nodes, that specific key of that color grade node. Okay, so and that means actually that maybe I'm adding another layer and I'm doing another key, but the one that I'm exporting is actually specifically the one from vector number 5 rather than vector number 6. Okay, so you could choose which one you can export. So you could actually use the color grade as a keyer tool as well. Yeah. So next question is from Jeff Sosa. Is there a way to raise the highlights in bands without blowing out the whites? Yes, there is. We're going to see that in a second. Is there a soft clip for the blacks, not just the whites? What's go-to tool for creating milky blacks? There isn't a soft clip for blacks, but there's a lot of people mentioning that they like the highlight soft clip and that they would want to add that, but currently right now there isn't a soft clip for whites. Let's go and see what we could do in bands without blowing out the whites. That's actually a very good question, and I should have addressed it during the webinar. And let's do it with this shot, actually, because we have nice highlights. I'm going to clone it and take it to another part of the timeline, so we can easily do this. So in the color grade node, it really is related to how the luminance discrimination is done. Okay, I'm going to be quite aggressive for this example. Okay, set the black point. I'm going to set the white point here. Okay, over there. compensate quickly. And let's bring that. And well, let me bring that down a bit. So it's really related to actually the hierarchy of this. So now if I push the highlights here and I'm still on vector number 1, I will be raising the white point way beyond the legal limit, okay? But now I'm going to add another vector, okay? And remember in the keyer, the base is going to be the source of the luminance discrimination of the signal. There now, you can see there that it's being contained within the legal range, okay? If I obviously overcook this, it will end up at some point getting over that limit as well. But then you could also play maybe a little bit with the ranges and bring it down if you consider this necessary or wanted to, okay? So you would be able to do that. But yeah, the intention would be that here with the highlights, you could actually maybe juggle a little bit there with the white point as well. At some point you will have control on how that is done. So yeah, basically, if you overcook it on the highlights, you will end up obviously blowing out the white point. Did that answer your question, Jeff? Cool. So maybe let's wait a minute to see if any other question pops up. Hope you enjoyed it, and well, it's been quite of a very interesting webinar with a lot of interesting things. I promised to Jeff to do a bring webinar later in the future. Jeff Sosa is asking, is there an equivalent of Resolve's negative midtone detail for quick and dirty beauty work? There isn't as a one push button effect or a one push operator to do, but you could build one. You could definitely build one. Yes. That actually, maybe it will mean, actually you could create a preset and maybe do it with a preset, but it will take us maybe long 20 minutes, 30 minutes to explain how to do it. John Salvia, can you template vectors like you can with nodes in Resolve? You can template a whole color grade. And in that case, you could template, for example, we could save this as an effects preset, okay? If I go create automatically, and I show this in icons, there we go. It will create that as a preset, okay? So one thing that I can do is if I go here to my effects, say, okay, just place on top. And you can see it's just applied the grade on top of that. So we would apply it as an independent color tool. What you can do, though, is if you go inside the color grade node, is select the two vectors and copy curve. Actually, it would be really cool to maybe just automatically import it into the color grade node that you're working. That is something that maybe we could look into. Yeah. Well, copy the curve and maybe go to the color tool here and add obviously the layers so it has the same, and then just say in the clipboard, paste selected, and it will apply it like that. Okay, so that could be another option. In this case, I overcomplicated something because I could have applied the color grade, but yeah. Jeff Grossfeld is asking, would there be a benefit in loading a LUT in the color tool or better in the LUT tool? If it is a technical LUT, I would use the LUT tool. If it's a creative LUT, I would definitely look into maybe loading it into the color tool, because I could apply a key. I could change maybe the key, how it's working. Maybe I could also apply a LUT in the inside and a LUT on the outside. So actually, it could be helpful in some creative job. So yeah, there is benefits either way.